Okay. Good evening. Today is Monday, July the 20th, 2026. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. Well, there's never a shortage of conversation here, and I am joined today by Matt Cundill from the Sound Off podcast and friend of the show. Matt, thank you so much for hopping in here to talk some about the 6-station closure tonight.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for making the request to do this on my time, because I got some time off coming up, and thought I really wanted to get this conversation in now rather than later, because I think it's important.
Absolutely, and I do appreciate that, and I'm always, you know what, I'm always happy to accommodate in any way I can. And so I want to sort of, when you start with your thoughts here, that when you found out that 6 stations that Rogers Sports and Media is closing down, 6 stations right back to back, were you shocked at the way that it happened?
No, because it's happened a couple times before. It's happened with Bell. It's happened in Winnipeg. I think 1290 went away. Bell's got rid of a few stations across the country on the AM side. So no, I'm not shocked that AM stations disappear. I think London was another station that Bell got rid of. No, not at all. But I was very surprised that 95.7 in Halifax, which is an FM signal, which is fairly important to the community. I was surprised that one went away.
I was more ultimately surprised at the I'm not surprised, but I was surprised at the timing of how they shut 570 News Kitchener down.
That one I also am quite surprised by, because I know what that station means to the region. I've had Mike Farrell on my podcast before, and I found the station to be very dialed in, very important, very, very plugged in. Kitchener Rangers have a home there.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I mean, if you're not making money with that one, I don't know. I mean, I look at CJLB in Winnipeg, although Corus owned, they've got the Bombers and they've got the Jets. I'm not fearful of a station like that closing, but if all these stations can close, it really sends a message. And I think the big takeaway, and what is Bell and Rogers saying by getting rid of these stations? They're saying we're not interested or cannot make money with these AM properties. I know there's a lot of hurt, and I know there's a lot of outrage, and I know there's a lot of discussion about this stuff. But I think it's really important to take notes here and say, what are they telling you when they are getting rid of these stations? They're expensive to operate. Transmitters cost money to take care of. The hydro bill is a lot. And I wouldn't buy one for $1. I have a lot of podcasts that I work with, 70 of them that I could probably put up there and run around the clock, but it's expensive to run that stuff. There's regulations that you would have to do. I would have to probably alter some of the content in order to make it plausible to put over the air. It's a lot of money to be running these stations. And unless you've got unless you really got it going on, I look at, I think it was like 2100 was the average quarter hour for Rogers Sportsnet in Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Vancouver sports fans are fickle. I know they're the biggest bandwagon people in the world. They're all on come playoff time, and we never really see them the rest of the year. But 2100 average quarter hour, that's less than my downloads for the Sound Off podcast. So I get it.
Yeah, and I feel like that's really the most sort of thing. Yes, the Kitchener Rangers did have a home there at 570 News, yes. But now they have to now explore an alternative, and they did put out a statement about that. But at the end of the day, the consumption of radio listening, if you ask, I personally feel that it's not what it used to be, and one can't compare it to how it used to be.
No, it's down. And even in Europe, we're seeing that it's down. So Fred Jacobs at Jacobs Media, the team there do a survey where they asked P1 radio listeners. So these are people who are subscribed to radio station newsletters, and they are obviously big fans of the radio station. Does your house have a radio? And 71% say, yeah, we have a radio, but that's down from 84% from 10 years ago. So the radio is disappearing from inside the home. You can get in the car. Radio is often first, but once you plug into Apple CarPlay, you really can plug into anything else. And that also, of course, goes for Android Auto. So the options are out there to do this. But I think the most important thing that nobody's really talking about is that in North America, we're over serving with radio. You go to Halifax. Halifax doesn't need 12 radio stations. Edmonton doesn't need 18. I think Halifax actually has 16, but that's too many, for what's out there. A lot of places in Europe, they do well because they don't pass out so many licenses. So Norway, for instance, is a country that does well with radio. The Norwegian language, if you would like to get communicated in your language, then radio is going to be a great place to go. If you don't pass out too many licenses, it's going to be good. But, sometime in the late 90s, early 2000s, the CRTC start passing out licenses for, we're going to get the alternative station. Then we're going to get the next station. We're going to get the next day. We're going to get specialty licenses. We're going to do jazz. We're going to give one to various communities in the city. And most came back and said they couldn't really make a go of it. So those licenses either got upgraded into commercial licenses or they were sold off into something else. And there were promises of 40% CanCon, anything to get the license. Well, those chickens have come home to roost. And now we are over-serving communities now with radio. And now that you've got so many stations, well, what are you going to do? We got to keep costs low. So you're going to play a lot of music. So again, another radio station hits the airwaves, another 10 in a row station. Playing 10 in a row on the radio is not interesting. That's not really going to do anything because I can play 1,000 in a row on my phone without a commercial. So that's not really a selling point to anything. Back again to Jacobs Media and their tech survey that showed, hey, they surveyed. Remember, they're asking radio listeners, P1 radio listeners, why do you tune into the radio station? What's the biggest driver? And it's personalities. And in 2018, personalities became the number one reason, and it stopped being music. And I think that was probably because people began to get into Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube Music. They really began to they had their music. They didn't need the radio station for that. But what they didn't have was live, local, and personalities. And so it's sort of, why are we letting personalities go? We should be training personalities to be live and local. And radio should be doubling down into this space. And I know it's expensive. And I know it's harder to train and build and mentor and do a 3-year investment project on your evening host or your afternoon drive host so that they become the big personality of your station in your community. I know that's hard. It's just a lot easier in the end for them to look at the salary and get rid of the personality instead of getting rid of Taylor Swift, because we'd all do a little bit better with playing a few less records an hour and letting some talent develop.
And I feel like that's again what's missing. And then a lot of it is too. There's a lot of things. See, you're going to listen to your local station, but it's often centralized, and you're hearing, and they're being voice tracked in different markets.
Yeah, you know what? I don't mind voice tracking. You can do that quite well, actually.
Yeah.
And I don't. Yeah, you can create content that is going to work in other parts of the country. I think Fearless Fred did a great job. I always loved listening to his show. It didn't really matter if it played in Winnipeg or if it was Vancouver or Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
But I do know that, when people create a piece of content, making it local and keeping it local, that's not the planet that, things like TikTok are playing on now. You can still make it local, right? But, some of the stuff to go viral, though, talking about something local may not work. But that doesn't mean that radio stations can't be the driver for that. That's where they can really break the rule. Like, I actually did a look at a few radio stations. Some aren't even creating any video outside. No, they're not creating any video, period. Every media house around the world right now has a video strategy. I asked some radio stations, what's your video strategy? Well, we don't really have one. Well, how do you use YouTube? We're not really sure. Well, YouTube is the world's second biggest search engine. Don't you want to be a part of that? So, yeah, you have to wrestle with a few things. But, again, if you do a video about, what's going on in your local community, no, you're not going to get a lot of hits for it. But you'll get the right hits. You'll get the right people watching it because people are searching for that stuff. So, again, even digitally, I find radio is using the wrong metrics and the wrong measuring stick when it comes to, identifying success.
Yeah, and you know what? Many of them don't. What I feel many of them aren't aware of. Or no, I shouldn't say aren't aware of, but are not doing it. The talk stations would often offer their talk shows as podcasts, but they would only make them available like on Apple or Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and of course the RSS feed. But why are they not putting their RSS feeds up on YouTube? Do they know how? It's very easy.
Again, that you should have a strategy for that sort of thing.
Yep.
And I think, Bell nationally didn't even have a podcast person in place for a long time.
Yeah, that's true too.
You look at Rogers. Rogers cut theirs back. They cut back the Frequency Podcast Network in terms of people. Yeah, well, they did that a few years ago. I noticed when Jordan Heath Rawlings ceased to be the host of The Big Story, that happened. But podcasting, I can tell you this because I run a podcast company, and it's a lot of work. And over the years, things like YouTube have made it harder to do. It takes 3.7 times more money and time to create a piece of video. And when you do the show and the show is over, it's a lot of work, to do that stuff after work. And yes, but I find also with radio people, they're asking me questions a lot. I'm like, you don't know how to do that? And it tells me that radio has had and they've had this problem for a long, long time. And I should write about this sometime. I think I might have actually said this on an episode, but there was a moment. The moment was in 2016. And the question went up on stage at the conclave to 4 radio leaders in the U.S. And it was like, what has your radio station or radio group done in the last 6 months that's been innovative? There was no answer. Okay, 12 months, still no answer. And that's happening. That's been happening for so long, as long as I can remember, like nearly like 2007, which was really the year that a lot of this disruption happened. There was really, what are we going to do to make sure we charge for 30s and all about the 30-second ad, and really nobody really paying attention to the innovative parts that come, with technology and filming and AI and YouTube and using YouTube properly. I think this is one part here where a lot of the podcasting world is ahead.
Well, and I mean, the other side of it is like YouTube and platforms like that are really good with the engagement side because a lot of people are using it and they see you there, usually just like or whatever.
I think the problem is that, and this, I'll be completely fair here with radio, is that you've done a show and then you have to spend as much time after the show making sure it's on demand. So if you do a 4-hour show, you really need to spend 4 hours marketing and doing the online stuff afterwards. That's what I tell a podcaster. How long did it take you to make the show? Well, it took me 5 hours. Great. You have to spend the same amount of time working on marketing your show as well if you really want it to be successful. And radio people are stretched. They don't have time to do all the things that I've just sort of accused them of not doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to be fair about that point, because I totally understand that. And then at the same time, to your question about YouTube, well, why don't you spend more time there? Well, there's not a lot of money in that thing.
No.
And that's what you're going to get told from the general manager. You get told that from the sales department, but they're looking at it wrong. That's your marketing. That is where you mark. People are there. They are actively seeking out things, and you'll pop up at some point because it is the world's second biggest search engine. Don't you want to be found? Don't you want to be searchable? I think it's high time radio people really look at that part of the job as being marketing and stop looking at it as being, what's the ROI on that? Because everyone's got a phone, and everybody is, especially the last 3 years, it's all been video scrolling.
Mm-hmm. And it's actually becoming the most preferred. YouTube has actually quietly become the most listened to, place that people are listening to podcasts, a little bit ahead of Apple and Spotify now.
Yeah, it's actually become kind of generational. Apple Podcasts is not really growing.
No,
a lot of the people who listen to my show are use Apple Podcasts, but that's because they're 45 or older.
Yeah,
and those are legacy podcast listeners who put the earbuds in and will listen to the show. Spotify, a little bit more of a millennial thing. Sometimes we got some younger listeners in there, but I'm telling you, these Gen Zs, I don't know what to do with them, man. I'm telling you, they don't want to clip the microphone on to their clip. They want to hold the lav mic. I don't know what that's about. Actually, I do know what that's about. It's because they don't know what to do with their hands. That's what that's about. Or maybe they want to look authentic, but Gen Z is using YouTube a lot for podcasting. And the reason why is because it's easy to find what you want.
Yep.
They need stuff now. And for all the efforts that Spotify and Apple have made into search, in YouTube, it takes 2 seconds to find what you want. Bang, it's just right in front of you. And they are more than happy to start the podcast and put it in their pocket and listen to it that way. So again, did you watch the podcast or did you listen to the podcast? Well, we don't really know. That's why we're going to say we consume the podcast.
Mm-hmm. See, but even with YouTube, with things like YouTube Premium, whatever, you can just lock your device and listen. You can still listen to the audio. I like the audio, but I've sort of gotten used to listening there.
Yeah, a lot of people do it. It's I think we did a survey, and I'm trying to remember again. It might have been Signal Hill who did this one. They did some research and found that was over 40%, nearly 50% of people who would consume a podcast without watching the video.
Yeah, and you can still see, and YouTube it still allows for that.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I bought a premium package. But I think YouTube actually saw the value in it, and I think
exactly.
I think you can just listen to it now in your pocket. It used to be that if your phone went dark, it would stop. Yeah, so they were smart enough and fixed that. Now it's again they further disrupted things.
Yeah, and also if the podcast, if it's not there in the YouTube directory, do you think YouTube was also smart here? Because with YouTube Music, you can add the RSS feed if it's not there, and you can listen to it.
Yeah, so if you have a podcast, by the way, a podcast is a playlist.
It is.
And yeah, and you should have your podcast as part of a playlist. You can go in and mark it up and identify it as a podcast, and there you are. You're just available in YouTube Music, just as you mentioned.
Yeah, yep. And but if it's not if it's not there already in the search, you can add the RSS feed if you have it.
Yeah, I mean that sounds easy, and I've learned something over the last few weeks just with some of the episodes that I've done. I've had to sort of just let go and just listen to other people.
Yeah,
and I went to Halifax and people were talking about, well, my podcast was censored or my content is censored, and I really wanted to say a bunch of things about Gaza, and it was censored. And I said, well, that doesn't sound right. So I asked this person, I said, what podcast was censored? And I said, oh, I just meant on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. And I go, yeah, but I mean an RSS feed. If you have your podcast and it's being delivered via RSS and you have a website, you shouldn't have this sort of issue that you're talking about. Oh, I don't have that. I'm like, well, and this is the thing. A lot of people are forgetting about the power of the RSS feed.
Yeah.
And if you have an RSS feed and you have a website, you are in business. You can go ahead and talk about whatever fake news you want in the world. You can make it up. You'll be by yourself likely. But at the same time, you may get booted from Apple, but you'll still have an RSS feed. So you go ahead and do that and make sure you have it. But again, most of the teeth gnashing and the worry and the focus is, I got to be on YouTube or I got to be here. Yes, absolutely, be there. Absolutely, go and get on YouTube and be there. But to the point of where you consume a podcast, I watched the World Cup yesterday, and Lamine Yamal was being interviewed, and CBS said, "Hey, do you watch our show?" And he replied, "Yeah, I see your show on TikTok." And that's what Gen Z does. They will consume what they want, how they want, and they don't really care about whether it was on Apple or Spotify or if it was an RSS feed. They don't care. They will think the short that you use to promote your show is the show. And that's tough beans for you if you wanted to count that a particular way. And I know that there are people like Dan Meisner at Bumper who are taking steps to thinking, hey, maybe we should be taking those short clips that we do, and maybe that should be counted towards, our metrics, and maybe we should be able to monetize, in that direction. And all that to say is this discussion we're having right now about podcast is also the thing that makes it difficult for radio to jump in with 2 feet into this digital space. And it used to be digital, we'd lose some Facebook. It's a video space, whether anybody wants to admit it or not. It is a huge video space that, yes, audio is going to be fine. There are more available ears than there are eyes for your content. But you need to be I think you really do need to be a participant in some fashion and have a video strategy for your radio station and your podcast.
Yeah, I agree there, because I think, but now with these stations, like, especially like the ones here, like you saw, the 2 Sportsnet stations, Sportsnet 650, Sportsnet 960 in Calgary, Sportsnet 650 Vancouver, and 570 News, of course, in Kitchener shut down. Where now, of course, there are petitions going around to stop them from closing, but the petitions I don't think are going to do anything, though.
No, you could also just buy it. If you don't like it, just buy it. Where are the buyers?
But then they have to start all over again with the station.
Not really.
No,
you don't have to. I think if you buy it, first of all, they don't have any. You can call it. You won't be able to call it Sportsnet, but you can call it Sports 650.
Yeah.
If you want. And then you just do your radio. You're buying everything in the station. Go ahead and get started. It's just cost prohibitive. It's just not going to make any money. It costs a lot to keep the transmitter going. It costs a lot to pay the hydro bill. And I look at in Canada, we've lost these sports stations because it's just scale. It's scale. You look at the biggest sports station. WFAN in New York.
Yeah.
You got the Knicks, you got the Mets, you got the Jets, you got the Giants, you got the Rangers, you got the Islanders. There's just, and half of those stations are being broadcast on the radio station. Yankees, Mets. So there's tons. In Calgary, what do you got? Flames, Stampeders. And if one of those teams is not good, nothing. And you can't be expected to, be that involved with sports. At that level, you're gonna need to produce a little bit more than sports, and that's really when personalities come in. And I thought Dean Mulberg was just great on that station, but he's gone off to do it himself. And he just has more flexibility to be able to do that with Barn Burner. So Barn Burner is a fantastic podcast out of Calgary. I know when Winnipeg lost their station, Andrew Patterson, Hustler, he's doing the same thing where you can tailor the programming to when the audience is available. The game is over. We're going to go live on YouTube. People have a place to congregate. It's about community, and radio's got this nice immediacy. And then here's the other little disruptor to sports radio, and that's Locked On.
Yes.
Locked On. Yeah. So the Locked On Podcast Network. I had a few cocktails with them, and I said, "Tell me about how this works." And when they explained it to me, I said, "Oh, you're going to put the local radio station out of business, aren't you?" So, yeah, because they were going straight after that. They just want only Buffalo Bills fans to be listening. Every day we're going to put a new show up, and you'll have a 30-minute show you can consume on your own time, and there's going to be some commercials in there, and the money just works, and you'll be paid for it. So there's another great disruptor. I think on demand was really important, and I've always been really suspicious about sports radio. What is really the size of the audience of people who want to hear about the third line and who's going to be centering the fourth line? You know what? I don't think people really care. I think people really do like the stories behind sports. We just came out of the World Cup. Mm-hmm. I thought the stories were really, really good behind that, but I don't think anybody really cares about who the substitutions were for Argentina yesterday. People just like the stories. And I think sports radio, when you get too deep into the weeds, makes it a pretty narrow broadcast.
Yeah. Now, do you see 680 News and Sportsnet 590 The Fan? They said those will continue to exist, which they are. But do you see them sticking around?
Yeah, 100%. They're not going anywhere.
No, I agree.
No, that's part of the vertical, right? So Rogers has the stake now in Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment.
Yeah.
And they're going to need something to sell tickets, and those frequencies will sell tickets. They will, they need to sell TV packages. They need to sell Leafs Plus, whatever that's going to be. They can talk about this. I mean, it's a vertical. It's completely going to work. I think the problem now is that, and this just goes into why is radio having these problems? It's because we allowed the phone companies to use them as a tool to sell us phones. And now that we've all bought the phones, we're now spending more time on digital and less time on radio, mm-hmm. right? So it's got to be part of a vertical. I can't even tell you how many times an hour on some of these stations, it's probably at least 2 minutes that I'm being asked to, buy a phone or watch The Good Doctor tonight on CTV.
Yeah.
But I mean, yes. Now that I feel like that is really when they announced because it was funny how it happened, the closure. Because it was interesting how it happened. Because the day before, they announced that they're going to do they announced plans to how they're going to do the rest of the 25%. How they're going to do finalizing all the ownership, the structure of how they're going to take over the 25% structure of MLSE. And then the next day, bang, 6 station closures.
Yeah, listen, it's oddly timed. That's for sure. Does one have to do with the other? Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to pay for stuff. But I think, the demise of these radio stations has been a long time coming. I think everyone has had a hand in it. Mainly radio itself grew a little powerless at times in the 2000s and 2010s. The Canadian Association of Broadcasters, really should have been right up at the front and asking for a review of radio from the CRTC. But, the people who were driving the bus are Rogers, Bell, and Corus, who have other CRTC files that were just way more important that needed to be dealt with, largely in television, largely with phone and phone regulations, that radio just fell by the wayside. And there has been no proper restructuring of CanCon, of policy, of a bunch of things. And going right back to Napster. So if you look at the period between Napster and then the creation of AI when it became fairly public, no review, nothing. That's insane. That's crazy. And so radio itself let that happen to it.
It did, and I feel like it didn't. It didn't really. I feel like it really didn't do itself. Yeah, I don't know about. I just kind of feel it didn't like. It's I don't know. It is change. It has changed, and it is changing. I mean, I don't know how I would phrase it, but it really hasn't done itself. It kind of fell behind a little bit, but I don't think it has a choice.
Yeah, I mean, the structure of it's weird. Let's start with the corporate side. So again, and by the way, I mentioned the two phone companies and the cable company often here, not just them. I think when you have corporate shareholders getting involved, and you've got you have to make you got to make bank.
Mm-hmm.
But how long does it take to build a brand? How long does it take to build a morning show? And it takes 3 years, and most of them don't have the patience to wait that long for something to break through. So it can be a little. It's not necessarily congruent to building a media brand. So I mean, some media brands take 7 years. Metallica took 7 albums. REM, same thing. They took 6-7 albums before they broke through. And we don't have that patience anymore. And corporations certainly don't. And they're happy to look at the bottom line and make decisions. And it's very easy to make decisions on people as opposed to making decisions on some other things. Namely, maybe you should play some less records. Maybe this should be about voices. Maybe this should be a little bit more about community and talk and connecting with the community, because that's what radio listeners are asking for, and that's what they're not delivering.
Like, do you feel at the same time, like now, also you do have some smaller, like independent owners in Canada, like My Broadcasting, White Oaks, etc. Are they in one way or another not going to be facing, are they not in a sense going to face the same challenge, because they also, it's not going to return to stations being live at night again, overnight. So I think, is that something really that, is it fair to say that, yes, the only difference also is that they don't have to answer to shareholders so they can continue building the brand. But is that a fair sort of point to make, in a sense that they'll probably face the same challenge?
Yeah, but they're equipped to make it head on. So all the things that I've been talking about that's important, they're executing, and they're doing really, really well. And I've listened to these stations. I've spoken to people in the stations. They've got good cultures. No, we're not going to have 40% EBITDA anymore. That's not good. That's not going to be the way radio stations get it. But they are, one thing that they can do is that they can pivot very quickly. And that was something that a lot of radio stations couldn't do, like to pivot these radio stations into directions. Oh, we're all of a sudden going to adopt a video strategy. Well, that's not something you can necessarily do overnight at a big company. But those stations have shown up equipped and ready to go. They're posting stuff online. They're tending to their Facebook pages and their Instagram, and they've got smaller digital strategies. Are they monetizing them all? Yeah, actually, some of them are, and doing a pretty good job of it. Is it a lot of money? Well, they don't have enough money to go and make a purchase of a bigger radio station in a bigger market yet, but they are right now very in tune and creating the blueprint for what radio needs to do. And I think probably in a year or two, you're going to find some of these stations are going to make a significant purchase or jump up possibly into a bigger market.
And like, for example, like if you look at 610 CKTV in St. Catharines, which Bell sold, and they got bought by White Oaks, and they're focusing on the brand there too.
Perfect example. I'm glad you mentioned that. Because, and again, they're expensive to run, but if you stick to if you stick to what people are asking for when they are listening, it will pay dividends. I think the idea of community building, which is where most media is at these days, because we're not, you're not really selling, a radio station. You're actually selling the audience, and it's an audience building exercise. It used to be sort of a brand building exercise. We're going to sell the brand. It's going to be a big rock station. You're going to buy and be on the rock station. We're actually now a little bit more focused on the audience. And I think 610 is a great example of, what radio really needs to pay attention to and be focused in the community and be able to turn on a dime when necessary. That's when news breaks, but it also could be, how are we going to distribute this? And I know you mentioned we don't have an evening announcer. Well, you don't need an evening announcer. You actually still need those great stories created from earlier in the day just to tell them again. Because one of the things radio has done badly, and a lot of these stations have not figured out yet, is they're telling the story once and then they're not really doing anything again. They might put it up in a podcast, but are you repurposing that content so it comes back another way online? And that's one thing that's one thing you can do when you have the right focus and the right strategy for running a station. And that's what makes running a national brand very difficult, by the way.
Yeah. And yes, I mean, they did, they brought Gene Velitis back, of course. And of course, and they've got a good group of talent down over there at 610 CKTV. So I think that they certainly, I think it would have been, certainly they've got a good brand going there. And, so we'll have to it'll be very, very interesting to see what kind of happens. And do I see 570 News coming back? No.
No, I'm a little disappointed they weren't sold. But again,
I was too.
To sell. Yeah, but there's no one to sell to, right? So most stations, have enough on their plate. Like you don't want to buy an AM station. There's nobody really coming up and saying, "Man, I would love to buy an AM radio station," and I just don't see the audience for that out there. At this point. So yeah, I think probably the list of people who are lining up to buy radio stations right now is just few and far between, and it's too bad. It's too bad.
The one thing I didn't quite see, I don't know, and you probably do remember that all six, pretty much all 5 or 6 of those stations, about 4 of those stations, those news stations, they aired Now You Know with Rob Snow, which was a syndicated show, in the middle of the day. That didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I've seen some. It really depends, and again, it takes a while to determine it. We also have to also specify here that the rating system is not all that great to really determine, whether something is truly successful or not. It's going to change soon, but there are people still filling out paper ballots and sending them back.
Oh my!
And the sample size is not small. We've seen what happens with sample sizes with the PPM meters when one of those disappears. I've seen some success with syndication. I think CJOB, the Ben Mulrooney show on CJOB, does quite well. It's done better than a number of other stations has done in that time slot between 2 and 4. But again, what's a good sample size to determine whether something is a success or not? It takes.
And Ben is syndicated out of Toronto.
Yeah, 3 books. You probably need 3 books to really determine if you got something good going on.
Yeah, and yeah, they certainly, yes, and of course, and I mean, the other thing was not all the stations aired all 3 hours of Now You Know with Rob Snow. 570 News used to just pick up the last 2 hours when he would do the talkback, which I think was interesting too. But
I think the most volatile on talk radio has always been any time between 2 and 4, between 1 and 3. There's always been sort of a lot of discussions inside, management meetings. What are we going to do with that particular period, and what's going to be our strategy? And sometimes I remember at CJOB we threw. We threw out some fun ideas, and at one point Dahlia Kurtz was hosting it, and I've never received so many complaints in my life about Dahlia Kurtz on the radio. but at the same time, her ratings were great. So I'm certainly glad that we didn't use the telephone as a sample size to make any programming decisions, because the ratings were very, very good.
Yeah, and do you think, and do you feel too that do you feel call-in segments still make sense today? I don't like them anymore. Like, I just feel like I don't like call-in segments. Yes, there has to be a way to engage still, but I don't like call-in segments. What do you think of them?
Yeah, I've noticed a lot of sportscasters have abandoned that, over the years, because I think we've all realized that really it's about reporting the facts, tell a story, get your point out there. And there's so many ways now to react. It could be online. You could be feeding, by the way, the reaction online.
Yeah.
And you may want the reaction online for your metrics, or for your, it might trigger the algorithm in a positive way. Having people on the air, most times you just get people on the air. First of all, it's hard to get people to call into a radio station as it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then the people who do call in, I mean, the minute you get a quack on the air to talk about some sort of quackery, that means, your story is kind of finished. It can go kaput. I think telling a story, making the point, letting people react online, make sure it's on your particular page, whether that's your Facebook page or your X account, Blue Sky, wherever it is that you're going to be building your media empire, and let people react and have it out there. But and remember something else, like, you also want to have your good, concise talk story. If you say it well, you get to replay it later at night, right?
Yep.
So yeah, call in it feels like a thing of the past, and rather is going to hurt the programming rather than help it.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple that still do it, like Blue Jays Talk on Sportsnet, Friday Night of the Fan. They still do it. Blair and Barker, I think, still do it once in a while. But other than that, I don't think there are that many. But you know what I think too, that now with all these places kind of making their websites so complex with everything on it now in one central place, I think it makes it very difficult to find things.
Yeah, so I was just actually going to bust into that particular part of my rant here, and that's why do we make it hard to find your station? And I mean, just I remember I went to Canadian Music Week, and it was probably like 2017 or 18, and Radio Player Canada had come out, but Bell didn't want to be a part of it, and I still think they're not part of it. And they were saying, well, everybody should be on the iHeart app.
Yep.
And I'm like sitting here, shouldn't you be everywhere? Shouldn't you be anywhere your listeners want to get you? Because this goes back to exactly what I was talking about with the World Cup example.
Yeah.
Lamine Yamal. Oh, I watch you on TikTok. I watch the show on TikTok. Well, if I want to use the iHeart app, or I want to use the Radio Player Canada app to listen to your station, or if I just want to ask you through my device, whether that's a Google device or an Amazon device, who cares? Shouldn't you be everywhere? Don't you want to be everywhere? Now, it makes me crazy to think of the arrogance of radio people that I've been in the room with over the years, who thought they could tell the listener where to go to listen to them. And I thought, that's kind of not how it works. They're going to tell you how they're going to listen to you. And here we are. We've got stations who are just not everywhere. And I think it's important that you are everywhere, especially where people are listening to audio.
Where I listen to my favorite local stations? On Simple Radio.
I'm sorry, where?
On the Simple Radio app.
There you go. See, I didn't even know that existed.
Yeah, Simple Radio.
See, be on the Simple Radio app.
Yes, and you get everything there. All the you get, it doesn't matter whether it's a Rogers, a Bell, Ivanov.
Yeah, I mean, I'm putting stuff up on TuneIn. TuneIn had a rough ride for a number of years.
Yeah,
I thought it was really going to be the place where all audio was curated. It had about 2 years of layoffs, and it kind of went backwards and slid down a bit. And Stingray came, and they propped it up, and they purchased it. And
TuneIn.
TuneIn has been was purchased by Stingray. I think as a podcaster, it's great because I know about the smart speaker access that you get with that. But if you're a radio station, and just because you're not a Stingray radio station doesn't mean you shouldn't make that part of where, where you put your radio station, because it drives smart speaker usage and people are there. You've got to be where people go, where any potential listener is. You're more than a transmitter now.
Yeah. No. The key thing is you have to be everywhere. And same with a podcast as well. Like you have to be, I agree with, I was listening to that one where you did about that you have to be everywhere. That I think it was, and I think that's important as well. You got to be like where your listeners want to consume you.
Yeah. I mean, for podcasting, it's not everybody knows what everywhere is. And I think a perfect example was the one you just served up. I didn't even know what Simple Radio was, but I'm going to, after the show, go and find out what that's all about and give that a listen.
Yeah.
And even at the end of the day, when, Apple and Spotify are carrying 80% of the listening of a podcast, there's a lot of other podcast apps out there, so that you really truly can stand up and say, listen to our show wherever you press play.
I think you have to give some examples.
Are you on Pocket Casts? Well, first of all,
of where to listen. You know what I mean? Like, people say, oh, where do you want to listen to your podcast? Or everywhere you get your podcast. No.
Yeah. So yes, good point. However, it's Apple, Spotify, and wherever you press play. Also, you should probably toss in your website. So for me, I always say it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and at soundoffpodcast.com. And your website always has a streaming app, or if you're a radio station, or if you're a podcaster, you should always have banners for Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and whatever other ones you want. I don't think you want to have a big laundry list beyond three other places, because then it makes it sound complicated. To say we're on Castro, we're on Pocket Cast, we're on Amazon Music, we're on iHeart. That sounds complicated all of a sudden.
Yeah. So kind of like how I've got it then, kind of.
Of course, how you've got it. You've got it set up well.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, no, so of course I did go back to.
I'm sorry to cut you off. YouTube is another one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I would probably add that in now. If hopefully you are on YouTube.
Oh yes.
I resisted for many years until I got my. It doesn't take me long to make me jump.
Yeah.
But when you go and say, "Hey, I've got a podcast," most people, they just know to go to YouTube to search for it because they know YouTube is a search engine. So a great example was I was at Snowden Deli in Montreal picking up some deli, of course. And Aaron Rand from CJAD does a show called The Corner Booth with a couple of other media personalities. And somebody from Calgary said, "Oh, where do you do that corner booth?" And the guy said, "They do it over there in the corner. You can just watch it on YouTube," because searching and finding things on YouTube is really easy. And if somebody wants to listen to it, they know how to listen to a podcast. Generally, we hope they maybe they'll just watch it on YouTube, but maybe they'll just listen to the rest of it on Apple. And we already have data that shows that people who watch a podcast on YouTube or consume it on YouTube, 75% will probably use it somewhere else, maybe on Spotify or Apple, or pick it up elsewhere.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I know. I've got like for all three of the shows that we do, all three are on YouTube as well.
Cool.
Yeah. And give us the website again, soundoffpodcast.com.
Yeah. So we're at soundoffpodcast.com. We've been spending most of our summer having conversations, a lot like the one we had now. I think I'm really trying to figure out, the radio thing. I mean, we started off as really talking about radio stories, and there's less and less of them to tell, unfortunately, every day that aren't loaded and full of bad news. And I can let social media take care of the bad news. I'm always trying to present solutions for content creators to tell a better story, whether that's on audio, learning how to audience build, teaching people how to read the data, looking ahead to some of the trends, most of which we covered here tonight, talking about video and talking about attribution, making sure that your show is everywhere. But the conversations we've had all summer is, what is a podcast has come up a lot. And here we are 20 plus years into podcasting, and podcasting is exactly what it is. It's what you and I are doing right now. It's just two people on a microphone. It's on YouTube. We're having a conversation. That's a podcast. But if I go to watch Tom Green's new show on Crave, is that a podcast? Yeah, people are calling that a podcast. You can go to Netflix now and watch a show. Two people on a microphone, that's a podcast. And if the two people have, no microphones and they're talking at each other, apparently that's just a bad TV show. So, what is a podcast has really changed. It could be a TikTok video. It could be a reel. I've been guilty of this for years. I listen to Clarissa Thompson and Aaron Andrews. I love their podcast. I don't listen to their podcast. I just watch their YouTube shorts go by. So, here I am sort of, giving accreditation to something that I've actually never physically downloaded. And if you really want to do the deep dive into, attribution and podcast attribution, I did an episode with Dan Meisner from Bumper and, talking about how to count, properly. Did people really listen to your podcast? And it's a fun exercise to go in and do that. But this summer I've been, and we talked a lot about YouTube. I didn't even talk about one of the new things with the Sound Off podcast just last week is we added video to Apple and we added video to iHeart. So if you go into the iHeart app or you go into the Apple Podcast app, you can watch the episode of the Sound Off podcast. Why you would want to watch me talk to somebody else is, I don't know why. I can't figure it out, but some of you people are doing it and it's fantastic. Who am I to judge how you want to consume it? You get a better listening experience because I've created a better listening experience with audio. But if you want to watch the video in a rather unedited form of two people holding microphones and talking to each other, knock yourself out. I'm here for you, and I'm giving it to you. It's also available on Amazon Music, but only in the States. So the video portion, by the way.
Yeah.
So there's a significant jump into video. And
exactly.
I won't bore you on the technology behind it, but it's called.
Well, we'll talk about that off air in a few minutes.
Well, or you can just go. Yeah, you can go listen to the Sound Off podcast, and I had 2 episodes in there that talks about the value of that video and how it's distributed, and it's exciting stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it is exciting. This is an exciting space, and I'm glad to be a part of it. Well, Matt, we got to do this again real soon in the future.
I think we're going to have to. I think probably in September.
Yes.
Hopefully the dust settles on this. I know Rogers is going to move back into Leafs mode as they get ready for another Leaf season, which remarkably ends in early April every year. Fantastic. Yes. I wonder how they manage to do that all the time. But for the rest of you who like hockey, the Montreal Canadiens are always a great option. Lots of room on the bandwagon if you'd like to watch hockey into May.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So. Sorry, I had to get that in there.
Oh, no. Yeah, and we'll be back next Tuesday, July 28th. Well, we'll be talking more about this, the radio station closures, and, of course, more news with Becky Coles. Stay tuned.